We are here today with Curt Kwak, the Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer for Proliance Surgeons. Curt is also the former Vice President and Chief Information Officer of Washington State Health Benefit Exchange. Curt, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Good morning, Jordan.
Thank you. So what I'd like to share with our listeners is some background on Proliance Surgeons. Proliance Surgeons is one of the largest surgical practices in the country, with 210 board-certified surgeons specializing in orthopedics, ear, nose, and throat, ophthalmology, general surgery, and plastic and reconstructive surgery at over 80 locations throughout Washington State. Curt, we have a few topics I'd like to cover today. I think we can run through IT talent retention and recruiting, some network transformation, cybersecurity awareness preparation, and maybe the long-term IT roadmap of tech initiatives over at Proliance. So let's get started at the top of that list. Tell me what's going on with talent retention, recruiting. What are your challenges and what are some of your initiatives to address those?
Well, our goal is always to take care of our existing employee base and provide development plans and roadmaps for them to fulfill their own personal goals, as well as professionally enabling what we do here at Proliance Surgeons. It's been difficult, got to be honest with you. The pandemic hasn't helped. The remote work, hybrid work environment dynamics was also difficult to manage. But I think we've done pretty well. We also had to compete against the larger name companies around us, like Microsoft, Amazon, and even guys like Expedia and Google and Facebook. They have huge presence here in Seattle area, so we had to compete for a talent with them. But recently, even with the news of large layoffs from these large corporations, really hasn't changed our recruiting strategies. We're still having a difficult time recruiting for good talent, good fit here at Proliance, and always looking. But our number one goal is to focus on our existing employees.
Interesting. You mentioned some big tech in California and the West Coast in general. Microsoft is in Seattle. I'm wondering if, when you're talking about IT talent recruitment and retention, are you speaking, are these people moving into the healthcare sphere? I know that Amazon's getting into healthcare. I know that there used to be a Google Health. I know that a lot of big tech has an interest in health. Are they moving into the healthcare arm of these big tech, or are they just leaving healthcare entirely?
They're not leaving healthcare entirely. I would say we're needing more folks, more technical talent to do the transformational things we need to do more in healthcare, whether it's interfacing, whether it's AI and machine learning, and automation of some of our back-end processes in healthcare. So we welcome any industry technical talent, but they're, again, really hard to come by, because maybe one, healthcare industry is a little bit foreign to many of these folks that are available, and they're looking to stay within their own industries.
Yeah.
Or, they have more questions and then ready to jump in something they might not be fully familiar with.
So how are you competing with big tech then with your recruitment strategy?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, we just cannot compete directly with them because they will always pay more, and they have these perks and benefits that not many of us could do. But we kind of promote the fact that healthcare is about serving people. It is about taking care of people. And it takes special mindset to really work effectively in healthcare. So there are folks out there that we're targeting, and hopefully we could bring in those folks with the key technical talents as well.
All right, well, let's move on to the network transformation.
Yeah.
I know that you're responsible for developing long-term information technology roadmap of tech initiatives. What's going on in terms of network transformation at Proliance Surgeons?
Well, we've been targeting data and voice integration or convergence, however you want to call it, for many, many years. I think we're finally at a point where we could honestly say we are relatively and more comprehensively converged at this point. And there's a lot of pros and cons to that. But one of the biggest benefits is that we are now a little bit more flexible and more agile in which direction we want to go. If we want to leverage technologies like SD-WAN more, now we can. because prior to what we've done, we were kind of stuck with the traditional connectivity, point-to-point connections, the MPLS, Metro E, where it was just one connection from point to point, and there wasn't much you could do over those. Now that we're leveraging DIA or direct internet access more and more for less cost, and we are able to educate ourselves a little bit more on things like SD-WAN and network resiliency and all of that, and also leveraging cloud infrastructure a bit more, we are able to actually open up a door for us to look at a lot of things in a lot more different ways than we used to be able to. So it all started with the convergence, and now we're beyond that, and now we're looking ahead to see what else we could do, and the future is looking really bright for us.
I'd like, for the benefit of our listeners, I think many are going through very similar sort of digital network transformation initiatives. Would you be able to speak to a very specific use case or scenario where you had a challenge you overcame in the last 1 to 2 years in the course of trying to upgrade your systems, and maybe how that segued into cloud or into moving away from point to point, something of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with, some areas. I'm going to throw some numbers. Hopefully this doesn't throw off some people. Let's say you're paying $2,000 a month for a point-to-point connectivity from point A to your data center, as an example. Well, we're now able to replace that with a $500 direct internet access with the SD-WAN writing on it. And that actually goes into the internet, which also provides the resilience versus a single point of failure back to the care center, or I'm sorry, the data center. And over that internet, we're able to add a lot more things, because now that internet access is actually more dense and actually has higher bandwidth than we used to be able to do from point-to-point connection. So it gives us that flexibility to add not only voice and data, but other specialty services and applications that we couldn't before. So you get a lot more. And not only that, we also opened up our options to go beyond the data center. Now we are working with third-party SaaS providers as well as third-party virtual infrastructure providers to build infrastructures in their cloud. So that enables us to decrease our physical real estate. That allows us to cut large expenses that we used to spend in our data centers to connect to all these different places. And with the savings, we could do other things, or we could invest in other areas that we couldn't before. So those are some of the examples, maybe not as specific as you would have liked, but I'm sure many people will relate to many of that.
Sure. A few follow-up questions there. So when you go to direct internet access, do you still have the ability to fail over in a mirroring situation or disaster recovery?
Yes, it actually gives you a little bit more options, because internet access can be achieved multiple ways. Versus point-to-point connections, there's really only one way, which is the local access provider has to provide a path for the point-to-point to come in. Or internet can be achieved by coax, by over the air, now that 5G is available. There's different mediums we could pull in internet access into some of our locations, and that provides not only divergent and different physical paths, but also the high level of bandwidth we need to run our operations and business. So a lot more flexibility, lower cost, of course, and then those things that we couldn't do, like redundancy and disaster recovery.
So I'd like to segue into cybersecurity awareness and preparation. Before we just launch into an open discussion on that, many CIOs may wonder, well, I'm opening myself up to direct internet access. Is there an associated security risk I have to be aware of, especially with PHI?
Well, just to qualify that, you're not really opening it up. You're utilizing like WebGate firewalls, edge firewalls, and things like next generation endpoint protection and threat detection systems to really protect yourselves. We did that even with the point-to-point connections, but with the internet, you have to be even more dialed in and leverage these phenomenal technologies that are available. And many are very affordable. And with that, you also need people to operate and keep your eyes on the network. So there's definitely that component of it. And us being in healthcare, absolutely, PHI is our number one focus to protect and secure. And we do our best. But at the same time, these attackers are becoming more and more clever. So it's not only to protect our perimeter from attacks, but also to protect within. So when an incident occurs, how do we just make it minimal damage or minimal penetration? So we do what we call layer defenses within to try to mitigate as much as we can and limit and minimize any, damage within your organization if some kind of a hack occurs. Because one thing we have learned, and everybody knows out there, that the hacker themselves are pretty savvy, but 99% of the time it's a mistake by an employee within the organization that may click on an email, click on a link, or open an attachment that looks valid, and then the internal attack occurs at that point. So part of that is also educating end users. Part of it is just providing educational materials for them to access and just keep reminding them that they are part of our overall human firewall.
Yeah. And so when some executives listening to this podcast right now may be wondering, all right, I understand cybersecurity is important. I have read multiple articles about health systems being hacked, and the data and the whole system having downtime. I wonder, how could you help those listeners right now think through how to allocate an appropriate budget or resources to cybersecurity and managing cyber risk? And the reason I ask is because I've often heard that perhaps an inadequate amount of resources are allocated towards risk, and it's difficult to justify an investment in cybersecurity when a successful amount of investment leads to no events. So it's difficult to evaluate how successful the effort has been. So could you offer any insight there?
Wow, that's very difficult, and I couldn't even begin to provide any specifics because it's different everywhere. It's different for hospital systems. It's different for small private practices, and certainly different for mid-size healthcare providers like ourselves. So it depends on the situation and level of risk they're willing to manage. But I think the most important thing they need to do, if you're a CIO or an IT director or an IT leader of any organization, is to make sure the key stakeholders are educated on the impact of the attacks and what the risks are. When they read about cybersecurity, that's one thing, but do they know what that really means in their organization? When they read about a big multi-million-dollar attack, does that apply to them, or is that just somebody else's story? So it's IT leader educating the stakeholders to make sure they're all on the same page. And from that point, you could start charting a strategy on how much you want to invest or you can invest and what kind of risks you're willing to accept or to mitigate. And from there, dollar budgets will come out. And you have to be careful, of course. You could always overspend and nothing could happen. But these things happen when you're least expecting or least prepared, and that's when the concept I just mentioned comes in play. How do you, if there is an incident, how do you mitigate it, and what is the number one thing you need to do? And some of us may say we got to have good backups to protect yourself from ransomware. Well, of course, that's pretty obvious. How about the disaster recovery or business continuity scenarios? Do you have offsite or alternate operational locations to keep your business going? And then what is your critical incident management and communication systems look like so everybody's aware when something happens in your organization? So there's layers of that risk management thing or risk management protocols that you do need to stay on top of. And a lot of it starts with your leadership, your will to get the point across and message across, and of course stakeholders that are willing to listen and work with you.
So you mentioned your leadership team. I'd like to open up the conversation a bit. What are some of the top priorities for your executive leadership team over at Proliance Surgeons? What are they trying to accomplish? What are they worried about? What has the greatest impact on their bottom line and business operations? And how are they leveraging your team to ensure that they're able to do the business as normal?
Well, number one thing for them is making sure the systems they use work as designed and they're available to them. Every time you have an outage, every time you have a system downtime, or every time there are delays in getting to your applications or even, images for your modalities, X-rays, MRIs, it's a time and money wasted for them. It's revenue that's not coming through the door. And also worse than that is the care that we can't deliver to patients who are hurting at the time. So how do we, as technologists, ensure that they receive the best support when they have issues, to ensure their systems are available every time they use it, try to. And if there are downtimes or delays, how do we keep them in the loop so they know exactly what's going on, or at least have an idea when things are going to come back online? So in turn, they could work with their patients and their customers to set and reset expectations so they're not too disappointed or frustrated with our service overall. So there's a lot of communication and collaboration going on. And it's not necessarily technology alone, but it's people enabled with technology. And then, of course, all these key processes to make sure everything kind of work in concert.
So you're an ambulatory surgical center.
Sure.
You have a long-term IT roadmap. What are some of the more ambitious or interesting, unusual agenda items that you have on that roadmap?
Well, we still have a variety of systems that we're trying to integrate. And we're not talking about going after one single application that's going to do everything for everyone. That doesn't exist, right? But how do you kind of mix in all these disparate systems and interface and integrate them so the users don't feel the compartmentalization or differences in those? If there's a patient data, it goes all the way through the process and comes back and feels like a one seamless process for them. And that's what we're trying to achieve: integration, interoperability with our skill set, our technologies, and doing what we can to provide that seamless experience for every user here at Proliance. So that's really the number one mission. How do we in IT enable that? And from that comes specific investments and technologies that will help enable parts of it. There are also inner workings with these vendors directly. So our EMR providers, our PACS providers, because they also want to do the same thing, right? So how do we integrate and partner with them so that they can update their software to do something comparable to what we're trying to do? And at the end of the day, all we could do is our best. And if we fall short, we have tomorrow to work on it even more. So we keep trying, Jordan.
Well, Curt, I do appreciate your time. This has been a wonderful podcast. For our listeners, I'll remind you, this has been Curt Kwak, the CIO and Chief Information Security Officer for Proliance Surgeons. Curt, thank you very much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure, Jordan. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah.